This is the Open Global Mind weekly call for Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. We had a very interesting and energizing conversation last week. And we are just post-election here. And one of the statements that came out of last week, which at least hung in my head a lot, and I'd love to use as a starting point here, was let's explore the opportunity in the crisis rather than the danger. And there's plenty of dangers that people are writing about, but it seems like that might be an interesting place to begin. And John, you had replied to the invitation, and then have come on. Do you want to sort of frame a little bit how you're approaching this?
Sure. One framing that I think is helpful is that the apocalypse is already here. It just isn't evenly distributed. Apologies to William Gibson. But it for me at least, that mind frame, which I've come to, via doomerism, indigenous perspectives, blah, 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 is helpful because there's a lot of people treating the incoming administration as a new apocalypse that now we have to refocus everything to respond to that. And implicit in that can be, before it was great, we just need to put it back. But actually, before was not great. Before was apocalyptic ongoingly for a great many, and new apocalypses are arising. The system we had generates apocalypses. So for me, the opportunity is to try to hold together, if we can, any specific apocalypse, including this incoming administration, together with an understanding of that the existing system was also generating apocalypses continuously. So that raises questions like, are there things we can do that address both of those at once? Are there similarities between the specific one I'm focused on, or relationships between the specific apocalypse I'm focused on and the apocalypse generating system that we're all struggling with? And then are there important differences? Is there something so unique and bespoke to this particular apocalypse that, I don't see a way to relate it? That's fine, but can we at least ask the question, is there a way to relate our response to particular things to the general? And the same the other way. I know a lot of people who are very good at very general, big picture thinking, always stepping back and including more, and sometimes to the point that they never end up working on any particular thing. And I think they miss out on a lot of wisdom in the long run. There's a lot of wisdom that people pick up in practice working with a specific thing. So I think it goes both ways. There's an invitation to people focused just on the apocalypse, whichever one, to relate to the larger, and an invitation for anybody who tends to always be looking at the big picture to be willing to come and engage some of the specific things that people, I posted last night on Mastodon, do DEI workers have a union? I was waiting till they came in to see which things this administration would push on first, right? That was a little more than people were expecting. And they are going full and fast at DEI. They're expunging it immediately out of the federal government, and they're going to push really hard on the private sector. And I saw a quote from the CEO of Bank of America, who said something like, this is going to lead to a really good conversation about these programs and what's working about them and what isn't, and so on. And I certainly hope that the business world can that's promising, and I hope the business world can have the spine to push back and force it to be an actual conversation. But yeah, the administration isn't going to be happy to do that. So I don't know what spaces there will be for that. But those conversations are important. There are reasonable criticisms of DEI. It just isn't in good faith, I think, most of the people who just want to get rid of them altogether. But anyway, that's one micro example. That's one, apocalypse some people are going to be very focused on, is the DEI thing. But there's many others.
Love that, Slow. Thank you.
And we're having a whole call with that framing tomorrow also. I'll post a link with the Co-Intelligence Institute. I'll post a link in the chat.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that a lot. Anybody else want to pick up any of those threads? Gil.
Just real quick, I stuck it in the chat. The etymology of we think of apocalypse as doom and catastrophe, but the etymology of apocalypse is uncover, disclose, reveal. So that's in keeping with the question that you're framing is what is uncovered, what is disclosed, what is revealed, what opportunities open here. And that's not to in any way minimize the catastrophes that will befall many people in these times ahead. We're already seeing that starting to happen. I think one of the questions for us is in the vast array of shit that will be going down, where do we focus that's most useful? Because we can't focus on everything. Part of the game of, I hesitate to call them the administration because they're not administering, but the part of the game here, Bannon was very explicit about this years ago about flooding the zone with shit. And part of their strategy is to produce overwhelm, immobilizing overwhelm, sputtering apoplexy in the likes of us. Like, do you believe what they just did? Do you believe what he just said? Look at all those lies. And that's a way of diverting people from calm, focused, strategic action. So there's like a million things to pay attention to. We can't do that. Where do we place our attention? Someone threw a Nietzsche quote out in a conversation yesterday. Something that he wrote about what he called passing by. And I don't have the quote in front of me. It was something along the lines of, if there is not love there, just pass by. And I think the meaning, as I understood it, was don't get distracted by everything you see. Pay attention to things that matter the most to you. It was not, I think some people interpret it as a recipe for callousness, and I don't think that was the read. It was be selective, be calm, be focused, be strategic, have an impact where you can and where it most matters. So that's all for now.
Thank you. And I'm hearing some commonality in what both of you have said so far, in that a lot of the things we've tried so far haven't been working really well. So how do we find our way to more productive methods? And I like that a lot because it involves a quest for productive methods. And I think a lot of people could engage in a quest for productive methods around a lot of different issues, whether or not they frame the issues in the same way. There's lots of interesting questions here. So how do we focus? How do we ignore the things we need to ignore? How do we discern between the things to ignore and the things to focus on? Those are all good. Rick.
Yes, I just wanted to react to something that you said, and I can understand somewhat of your frustration about the meta level thinking and being fuzzy and whatever. On the other hand, I think if we take an integrative ecological approach, everyone in the system has something to play, and the question is, how do the different parts of the system connect in such a way that we can make progress? And interesting enough, I subscribe to the World Health Economic Forum to watch them, and you can watch replays. And I tell you, there's some fascinating stuff going on there. There's the Open Brain Institute, where I'll share a link to the search I did on it. The many others. There's something on GovTech, and there are places in the world like UAE, which I've been there, and have concerns about it, but they're doing some amazing things. And apparently their government, now whether it's just good, propaganda, has the highest trust factor in the world. Now you can have concerns about it. There's double speak in every country. But coming back to your focus on DI is just another one of those scapegoats, and they're going to ride it into the road because it's one way of galvanizing limbic and reptilian brains to say, within what I call the deranged Trump psychosis syndrome. But anyway, my point is, think ecologically, and I think we have to have different learning methods. And to be quite candid, even the learning method we're using here, I have reservations. Are we using our learning resources the best way? Every session I go to is a course of routine. I ask myself, what was not learned today? What could have been learned today? What could we do better? And if we don't do that on a habitual way, then we're not going to make progress, which comes back to governance. And it comes to governance of this small group and at a larger level. And there was a group at the World Economic Forum that was talking about the governance of technology. And so I'd encourage you to, take a look at, subscribe to it and look at some of the presenters. I'm going to go back and look at them. I mean, there's a whole week of it, and I've only been able to get a small snapshot of it. But, okay, it's elitist and whatever, but they have some incredibly bright minds there. And some people are doing amazing work, which is not known. Estonia, people know a little bit about Estonia. There was somebody presenting from Estonia and how they've developed the digital infrastructure of their governance. It's mind-blowing. Anyway, I'll put a link in for that. And also, I'll put a link in to the Open Brain Institute. And that guy who presented just blew my mind, what they're doing and using AI. It was just, I'll put a link in. So, I had to overcome my prejudice about the World Economic Forum. And it's worthwhile overcoming, if you do have any prejudice against it, to look at it.
Thanks, Rick. And we don't do enough triple loop learning in this group. You are right, and we ought to be a little more meta than we are. So we'll come back to that. What's the theme of this year's Davos? We have a theme every year.
I didn't even look at it,
I
actually.
just posted the link.
Yeah, the link. Sorry, you've got the link, but there's a theme every year for the conference. For the event.
Collaboration for the intelligent age.
Cooperation for the intelligent age?
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Oh, thank you. There you go. Thank you very much, Pete, as well. Seems apropos along our theme here. Judy, please jump in. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I guess I'm thinking there's a couple different ways to look at this. And one is, how do we look at the high level, larger impacts? And how do we look at what we can actually individually, personally, meaningfully contribute to do? And consciously weighing those two things might be useful, because it seems to me we need to have examples of things that work that can be then done on a larger scale. And so it might make some sense to at least have a blend, if not lean slightly toward where you can directly have impact, so you then have a story to tell and share that could be replicated.
Thanks, Judy. So DEI has come up several times in the conversation so far. Klaus, I'll come to you in just a sec. DEI has come up several times, and I'm wondering if we should dig into it a little bit, because well, let's hold on a second. I want to see what Klaus and Slow have to say, and then if appropriate, head back into DEI. So go ahead, Klaus.
Yeah. I listened in on some DEI conversations yesterday, and basically the challenge here is there are no statistics, how many people of color or various definitions of DEI are in positions. And the question is, are they in positions because of the condition or definition, or are they qualified to do it? Are they inherently qualified to do the job? And I think that's what they're struggling with right now. Are there people who are incompetent or marginally competent that have been placed in there because they happen to be a minority or whatever? But anyway, what I wanted to say is we all have a bucket of experience and skills, in a particular profession or segment. And so I had a meeting with Shimon yesterday, and we decided that we're going to set up an AI chatbot specifically focused on the 2025 Farm Bill. So the ChatGPT 4.0 just added a new feature which is called project. So you can actually develop a project um, in the system, and it consolidates the conversation around a specific topic, and it allows you to take a real deep dive. So I started training this thing going back to 1930 with when the Farm Bill was first initiated, and going through the history of Farm Bill and all of those things. So Shimon is looking at this from a medical perspective. He's a neuroscientist. And Shimon has the 1,000-day initiative, meaning defining the first 1,000 days of a child's life and the impact nutrition has on the development of the brain and so on, even starting with gestation. So the Farm Bill is the second largest bill after the defense bill. It has such a profound impact on our society and our lives. Very few people are truly aware of it and truly understand all the facets. $182 billion a year spent on nutritional assistance programs, which are a prime target, for the Musk initiative here. The problem is when you go and look into what they want to do in education, in the food system and so on, is there is no intelligence behind the changes they want to make. There is no plan, other than we need to cut. And you can't, and it's not about cutting, it's about reforming. You could actually cut this budget in half, the $182 billion, and open up nonprofit kitchens to allow the redemption of food vouchers, and you would improve the system and improve access to healthy food. But the system is suffocating in regulations that are inherently corrupt. The system has corrupted, and so when you look at this, so much of what Trump and this whole group is saying is correct. The system is highly inefficient and it's highly wasteful. But there is no plan, there's no vision on where this should take. So my commitment and Shimon's commitment is we're going to develop a plan, on where you could take the food system and improve it in the sense of biodiversity, ecology, personal health, individual health, funding, the money it takes, and so on. And we are engaged with NGOs who don't have the capacity to do this kind of research, but we can share, this kind of information. So Shimon is setting up a website and all that stuff. So I think there is plenty of space for initiative, for engagement, and using your capacity, and then of course, share freely.
Oh, thank you. That's super interesting and specific as well. I think we love that. Slow.
I think there's a general pattern of hope where there are things they're tearing down and not, there may be something correct in their analysis, but they tend not to be putting back something that actually reflects that analysis a lot of the time, at least. And I think there's a lot of hope from people who are upset at what's happening, that some of the things that get taken apart, when there is some opportunity to put something back better or different, that there will be more openness to that, whereas there tends to be a lot of defensiveness about whatever is in place normally. But I feel a little anxious about it, like that doesn't address anything now, but I think it's important. I think it's good that there are people who are thinking that way and kind of preparing for those moments that will come in the future. And even now, if that kind of research gets to the right people in Congress, that will help, give them really good talking points and stuff, even if they're going to lose the vote for sure. Going back to the DEI topic, maybe try to take that as a framework to look at the DEI thing. I don't think DEI, I mean, some people have to focus on DEI as DEI, right? Because they're in it, they're trying to defend it at their workplace, figure out if they're going to fight the administration on it, et cetera. But I think the larger framing, or at least a larger framing to hold it in, I think is racism and anti-racism. There's a lot of people on the MAGA side who believe there is no more racism. It doesn't exist anymore. And so I think it continues to be really important to be telling the story, showing the evidence, that there still is a lot of racism. And then, yeah, they're saying get rid of this anti-racism program. And so then it is kind of on an opportunity for a lot of us to do some of the work more in public of critiquing those programs and coming up with things that might work better, and seeing if we can peel away, some of the centrists, who aren't really racist. They just don't. They just see problems with those systems. But yeah, all of this feels like kind of small ball in some ways. It's like, so the one reason why I think racism and anti-racism is a good framing is because then that connects also to the other big push of the administration, which is around immigration. So I guess the inquiry for me is from that framing, if we look at a lot of what they're doing as being related to that framing, then I'm like, okay, what is possible now that wasn't possible before? What can we do around race, caste, whatever in America and in relation to the world? Because another thing that would fit also in this thing would be they paused all foreign aid, and the countries that are most desperate, day to day, month to month for that foreign aid are not countries full of white people. So that is there also. He's getting the leaders of all those countries to come run to him and deal. So racism and empire, really, like if we wanted to pick a big framing that is in big shift due to this administration, racism and empire. So what do we do with that? Where I don't know, but that to me that's a locus of inquiry that could be incredibly powerful. What could we do in the next few years, given that we know the administration's push and how they'll react to things? This is the great power of nonviolence, right? Is that you know how the other side's going to react, and you use that in your strategizing. So at that level, are there things we can do over the next few years, given what we know and what we know about how they'll respond to things, that might move these things forward in some useful way?
Thanks, Lo. A couple thoughts before I go down the queue. Thank you for offering some alternative framing. I think that's an important piece of what we should try to do here together. I think one of the things we're missing is feedback loops on social experiments with then actual interventions that try to fix the social experiments. Because a lot of things that just got shoved back down or broken or are being put out of action entirely, like DEI initiatives, were in some sense social experiments to correct a perceived ill that failed. And there's plenty of people will tell you that so hold on. There's just ask people at work if they think DEI initiatives of different kinds were welcome and were useful and were whatever. There's just a tremendous pushback. Like, I'm not sure that DEI officers and DEI training inside of corporations was the way to fix diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fact, what it's done is it's poisoned those words. It's poisoned the words. And then when you say the framing might be racism and anti-racism, I'm like, I think the word anti-racism is like totally poisoned right now. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole if I were walking out with a platform. But I don't want to poke holes in platforms. I want to see if we can sort of build stuff together. But I'm trying to sort of look for what are the frames or what are the words we can use that will attract people from whatever political end they might be, but that also address the underlying problems. Because I think a lot of people see that there's problems out there. The world is a mess. That's why they're voting radically around the world, is that they're sick and tired of the problems. So Rick just posted a study that says DEI did not mostly work. Actually, it's a perplexity response apparently in the chat. So let's go to Gil and work down the queue.
Just to interrupt, just because it's, I asked a specific request, and it
Yep.
gives a reference to a book called Diversity Incorporated by Pam Newkirk, who is a Black scholar who debunks a lot of DEI work.
Thank you. Gil.
Yep. I was going to respond to Klaus, but I guess I got to say something about the DEI conversation first. Well, first a reminder, Jerry, you're talking about people voting around the world. Let's remember that Trump got 49 point something % of the vote of the eligible, of the actual voters in the United States, which is a very small fraction of the eligible voters. 74% of independents didn't vote. So let's just keep in mind, there's not an overwhelming move to MAGA here. MAGA won, but it's not a mandate or a landslide by any means. So there's that.
They're certainly acting as if it's a landslide or a mandate, but that's a different question.
Well, of course, that's how they're going to play it, and that's why
Yeah.
they're moving very fast on everything. I mean, take out your Project 25 and start checking the boxes. It's an impressive onslaught. I don't know that DEI is a failure. I think DEI as a thing maybe is a failure, but I see a greatly expanded diversity in American workforces. Not enough by my standards, but role of women, role of people in color in American business has greatly expanded. The bureaucratic DEI mechanism for doing that, I'm not in companies, but I can imagine that what you're describing is true about that. Personal experience with that when we were building the advisory board of Critical Path Capital. Couple of friends pointed out to me that it was filled with people who looked like me, with a couple of white women. And my initial response, I'm embarrassed to say, was, well, I don't know people of color who are strong in this area. And then I stopped and thought, wait a minute, this is an enormous load of bullshit from me to me. It's not that there are not people, it's that I didn't know. And it's not that I didn't know, it's that I didn't think. And I stopped for a moment and immediately thought of like 10 people who I know personally, have worked with, deeply respect, who are strong in that area, called a bunch of them up, and they're on. And the problem was where my attention went. I went to my default familiarity circle of people who I normally hang with, and I didn't reach beyond to look around in the wider universe to find people who I didn't bring in because they were people of color, but because they were terrific. I hadn't looked broadly enough. And I think, the original intent of what was called affirmative action back in when that was at the 60s or 70s was not quotas, but to say, take action to widen your scan and look to places that you don't normally look and talk to people you don't normally look to be more inclusive, have a wider pool from which you can bring in quality. Really different kind of approach. That got turned into bureaucratic systems. And I think that's where the failure is, maybe. Clearly, it's been weaponized. Clearly, it's been weaponized. It's a major weapon of the MAGA movement. I don't know that they particularly care about race or the inverse of it, although, clearly some of them are racist. But this is, to my read, much more about power and money, with everything else as an instrumentality for that. So there's an opportunity in there, yeah. Although I don't know that it's a current one, and I don't know what role we all have in that. On the, if I could just go back to Klaus's comment, I realize this is long. Klaus, I started to react negatively to what you were saying because it sounded like a faith in the system strategy, which I don't have. But I think there's something very important in what you said on reflection, which is that we know that what has been is highly defective. We know that there's regulatory capture. We know there's excess layers of bureaucracy. We don't want to return to, we want to go into something else. And the opportunity for regulatory reform or regulatory innovation is huge. Are Musk and people interested in that? I don't think so. But as the as the impact of the bull in the china shop approach starts taking effect, and MAGA voters realize, holy shit, this is not what I hoped for. This is not good for me. Yeah, maybe there's an opportunity. You know, I guess my itchiness, Klaus, was that it sounded like you're going to try to use reason and rationality and good sense to persuade people, which is not going to work. But what will work is pain, and as the pain ripens, there's going to be pressure, I think, on electeds who are scared to death of Trump getting them primaried out, but they're going to start hearing from constituents who are saying, this really sucks, and this is really hurting, and something different needs to be done. And maybe there's an opening there for approaches that reduce regulation, reduce bureaucracy, improve performance, improve service. And I have one example from my own experience of a tech company. Was building products that had 30-day life cycles. The regulatory approval to approve the changes in their production systems were 90-day cycles. So it was like dead on arrival. And they asked the regulators if they could see the workflow of the regulatory process and take it to their process engineers. The workflow looked like a plate of spaghetti, not like arrows and switches. And they turned the 90-day regulatory process into a 4-day regulatory process, without any reduction in health, safety, or any other of the criteria that were driving it. And so, you know, that was an example, I think, of the sort of thing that might be possible, both functionally and as a political bridge to start to peel away constituencies from the MAGA adjacent. I've spoken.
Thanks, Gil. Kevin in the car. You are muted, though.
I'm trying to get there. Thanks.
There you go.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I mean, DEI wasn't supposed to work, and it didn't. And you know, it just had a moment post George Floyd, and it wasn't real, and it wasn't designed to work. So that's I was doing this work before it all happened, and I wondered if that was going to be a phase change. No, it was a moment, and then you can't rely on white liberals, and so they didn't hire well. They didn't integrate them into the system, and they had no goal of really subverting the colonial ways that they treat things. So that's no problem. That's how it is. I think the opportunity with us post disaster, if I can just talk about that. I mean, DEI is dead, and it never was supposed to live. That's the simple answer. You just can't trust white liberals, and you shouldn't rely on them. That's okay. You know, the opportunity is one example. I think, you know, we're doing anything. I've worked on economic justice a lot. The number of white folks who care is really, really small. I've got a project now in a network of urban gardens where we have food security that's climate resilient, because these are hydroponic units that can move to where the people are sheltering, that will start in the 5, you know, red line neighborhoods. So there'll be reparations involved, and then we'll go to the rich neighborhoods and we'll go at market rate. And we're going to come with a bill to the folks who've been undertaxed. Biltmore Forest is the one where they've been undertaxed by 4 million, compared to Shiloh that was overtaxed by 1.2 million. And we're going to do the same thing for East Side, South Side, Burton Street, and Emma. And but what I've found is that white folks get on board if you start with food security, and then you give them current food, future climate resilience baked into the system, because, you know, none of these, bunch of these gardens flooded, right? And so you need hydroponic that moves where the people are who need food. You know, we're finding really good acceptance when we start with food security, climate resilience, and situations, but you're not about reparations, because whites don't mostly buy it. So anyway, there's really huge opportunity. We're also looking at mutual insurance with a community that has already counted the cost for repair of their houses. It's 4.5 million, and they've raised 125,000. So they're interested in other solutions. So there's lots of opportunity to create a commons-based economy post-disaster that you couldn't do it before the disaster. And for DEI, you know, it did what it was supposed to do. It failed in the way they wanted to. Yeah.
It dropped out a bit when you were giving a list toward the end there, you said starting with food security, climate change, and then you said
Food
mutual
security,
insurance,
climate resilience, and reparations, because we're going to the 5
reparations.
neighborhoods that
Yeah.
were redlined, doing it first there. And so they get reparations as a bonus, but it's really a pilot that's not in their neighborhood to see if it doesn't work, right? I mean, the folks in affluent places don't want to do an experiment, but they want to benefit from an experiment. So we'll have a cooperative or stewardship-based business that will sell to the mainline folks at market rate. But we'll come to them with the bill for reparations. And the story, and we're doing it, the neighborhood that will have to do that on is at the gates of the Biltmore, which is the foundation of our $3 billion tourism industry. So they would not like to see tax protesters as they bring in tourist buses. So, I think we have a deal behind the scenes with the Cecils, who are behind the Biltmore and, also created Biltmore Forest as this tiny little enclave. One of Trump's lawyers lived there, the tall woman who was really crazy, if you remember that one.
Sydney?
What's that?
Sydney?
Sydney, right? Sydney's. They tried to serve the subpoena on there in
She's a
Biltmore
neighbor of
Forest.
yours? I'm so sorry.
Well, no, she's across town. I mean, look, the oppression happens in Biltmore Forest as a matter of course. They got a $4.1 million tax break on the backs of Shiloh and East Side and South Side and Burton Street and Emma. So anyway, you forget about it. Economic justice never sold. DEI was trying to sell it. It doesn't sell, but you can sell food security and climate resilience and get economic justice as a nice to have that you don't have to pay extra for.
That's a lot of stuff, Kevin. Thank you.
It's just
Rick.
one thing. It's a network of gardens that is going to have mobile food security.
Rick.
Sorry, I was writing something.
Yep.
Trying to connect to my thoughts. I'll put a post in about this actually. I want to, I think we have to learn from the dark side. And if you look at how Project 2025 has been so incredibly successful, I mean, that was huge investments, bringing people together. And, this is where I might, differ from Kevin's comments, is that, the libs haven't been able to work together very well and create a coherent force. And so if they are,
This may be an understatement, Rick, but go ahead.
you can bash them as much as you like. I mean, that's fine. I don't mind that. I don't regard myself as one. But the thing is, if you're going to have a counterforce, then you need to have something that brings people together. And I would advocate that we need to start thinking about Project 2029 as a progressive, creative force for equity meta governance. Now, equity is a word that has been bastardized and been distorted and whatever, and we have to decide what that term means. Even using that word in this group will trigger some negative reactions. No, that goes without saying. But if we don't define the term and come up with a way of describing how we want to create a fair, free, flourishing future to benefit all and regenerating planet, then we're not going to get together. So the problem is we're so atomized. And it's so much easier to organize around an overactivated limbic and reptilian brain than it is to herd cats coordinating our neocortical brains. So.
Thanks, Rick. I'd like to steer back into the DEI waters for a second, just to deepen one spot here that's come up multiple times for my own benefit and hopefully our mutual benefit. And I want to separate. I mean, interestingly, I think it was the U.S. Armed Forces under Truman, I think, that began really sharp desegregation and integration and showed the country practically what this could look like at scale, and that it was not a problem, that it was not an issue. Of course, there were lots of issues and there were lots of problems, but I think the U.S. military was one of the first large entities. So it seems to me like crazy ironic that Trump too is now attempting to flush at least DEI signals from the entire system as much as they possibly can. They're really going to fire everybody who touches the theme. They're going to expunge the language from all legislation and write regs and whatever they can. It's very interesting. I'm still looking for like the positive things that the Trump administration is proposing to do, because most everything I've seen so far is shutting down, denying, changing, doing whatever. However, just to go into DEI, there's so many different theories attempted between busing and quotas and affirmative action and whatever else, and there's plenty of complaints, and we don't have time or even resources likely, although we do have artificial intelligence thinking partners, to go into the various things that have been tried and how they have or have not worked. I do think we have a more diverse workforce than we ever did. I think that is a fact of today's workforce. I don't know the stats, and I've forgotten who was saying that we're not really collecting those stats, so we can't really see them, which is a problem. But the effort to there is something about the dynamic of instituting DEI and across corporate America that was troubling and difficult, and as Kevin's sort of dismissively said, never meant to work. And I don't know that that's true, that it was never meant to work, but it was not put in place in some earnest, useful way. And also, I'm not explaining what I'm trying to think of here very well. We haven't done a good job of fixing the underlying problems, or of even scratching the underlying problems and doing something serious about them. And the reason that liberals and progressives are seen as performative is that they're happy to go out and protest with Black Lives Matter, but 8 years of Obama, and are Black people's lives any better? Not really. 4 years of Biden, and still so many of these problems are completely outstanding. And none of those administrations took bold leaps. And just got to say, if you look at the first 100 executive orders coming out of the Trump administration, they are attempting bold leaps in the opposite direction mostly that I would like to see. But boy, are they attempting bold leaps. Like shutting down birthright citizenship is a really bold leap. And you could say, yeah, that'll never pass through scrutiny or the Supreme Court. I'll tell you, they spent 50 years loading up the Supreme Court, and there's no telling what the Supreme Court will actually do at this point, in particular with a completely Republican administration. So I think some of these crazy ass things, if they get pushed all the way to the top court, might actually go through. So I'm meandering a bit, but let's go to Klaus.
Yeah, the fallout from DEI goes beyond hiring decisions, in federal agencies. They're already instructed groups, for example, like USDA, to take any consideration of DEI out of the granting or out of issuing grants, loans, and support programs. For example, for Black farmers who have been disenfranchised. I mean, in the most incredible ways. So that is currently undergoing a legal challenge, because the administration doesn't really have the constitutional right to do that, because these are funds that have been appropriated by Congress, and the administration simply is supposed to administer, the distribution and administration of these funds. But they're just going to do it. And so the same thing is contractors to the government. So that they're now applying DEI to companies that are contracting with the government, and they're now being held against the standard of abolishing any DEI consideration. So that's where this is getting really insidious, and very rapidly disseminated, in the throughout the economy, and it's happening so fast, that I mean, you would have to mount, dozens of lawsuits, which people are trying to do, but this is already rolled out, on day one here.
Thanks, Klaus. Dave.
Yeah, it's kind of so with so many issues swirling around, right? It is a fascinating moment. The my big critique, I guess, was going to be kind of that I feel like we're getting a lot of pushback from what I think has been our social engineering, right? This is what I've been like the last couple of months. I've been complaining about our technocracy, you know, that somehow us smart people are going to organize things and then the rest of the world will benefit. And that gets represented in government a ton. I've been arguing with my public health wife about taxing sodas because they have too much sugar. You know, as an example of what I think of as technocracy. This is social engineering. This is, you know, I know what's good for you kinds of things. And I feel like we're getting a lot of pushback from that, you know. And I don't exactly know where you go from it. I mean, you need some kind of increased autonomy, right? I mean, there's some kind of utopian vision of a collaborative world that you know has to be realized. And I just finished reading Serviceberry by Robin Will Kimmerer, which is just a delightful little book. You know, very quick read if anybody's looking for it. And some of it's just really helpful thinking about kind of what would, you know, kind of biomimicry of economics would be look like. And some of it's just, you know, frankly, utopian. It's like, you know, people do bad things and we shouldn't do bad things, kind of. And it's like, well, that's not good enough. We gotta go better, farther than that. Um, and so, you know, and I kind of feel like, you know, the things that I look at, you know, things like we built the internet kinds of things that have been genuinely collaborative, that seem like they kind of reinforce autonomy and stuff. Um, don't seem to be things we know how to reproduce. So, you know, I'm not sure how you implement that given in the United States in the modern structure kind of. So I feel like we have to kind of dig deeper than we've been tending to dig. And I don't know how deep that is or where it leads us really. Um, and then just I got to throw in a side topic that's orthogonal, but I'm just kind of amazed at some of my, you know, my people I no longer communicate with because they've gone so hardball MAGA and I can't communicate with them. But then when we argued before, it would be around kind of the constitutionality of, you know, things and how the Democrats were doing things that were unconstitutional and, you know, kind of the sanctity of the Constitution. And we're watching the executive branch just cut the legs out of the legislative branch in this really bizarre way. I mean, like from pardoning the people who tried to kill them to not enforcing the laws to, you know, which is just should be a massive constitutional crisis. And we're worried about, you know, I mean, it's just bizarre. We're just living in a really wacky world. So rant over.
Good rant, Dave. I think that's it's sort of a little bit of a sense knock into us because you're right. There's a very intentional centralization of power in the president, in the executive branch. There's a whole series of things that have been long planned, and the flood the zone tactic is now a legislative. It's usually flood the zone is flood the zone with shit, which means make so many claims and counterclaims and facts and misstatements and so forth that nobody knows what's true anymore. Nobody knows whom to trust. That's the typical Gish Gallop or flood the zone with shit strategy. This is a flood the zone with activist, um, sort of extreme legislative activity. Maybe legislative is the wrong thing because I don't think executive orders are legislative. Anyway, executive activity. But flood the zone with so many things going on at once that a disorganized left has no defense and no better way to implement things. And it's weird because we say that the right doesn't, we say that the right doesn't have programs and positive things to do, but the left's programs are all too often we were trying to solve things with programs with a capital P, when what we might have been doing was solving things with support for decentralized institutions, the support of norms, the support of communities, very, very different sorts of things. That we have a programmatic way of trying to implement change that seems to be a big fail over the long run. And I'm unhappy about it and would love to find better ways to do it. Gil.
Got so many things here. The lawsuit started on day one. Perg filed suit last week. What's her name? I don't know. Anyhow, stacks of lawsuits are coming. There will be lots of legal action. Yeah, the Supreme Court's been captured, but Biden appointed a lot of judges. So things will be slowed down as they work through the court process. There's that. Dave, I understand your concern about the sugar tax. Please compare that to, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars are spent on sugar advertising, which is also a behavior modification program. So there's that. It's not all in a vacuum. Jerry, I thought you were kind of dismissive of Kevin's observation that these things were not designed to work. I think that's an important question.
I think that's sort of an extreme interpretation of what's up, and I don't know how I
No,
feel about it. But yeah,
I mean, I get that you disagree with him, but I felt
yeah.
it was kind of an offhand dismissive of that's silly, and it's not silly. It's an
Oh,
assessment that's
so
worth looking at.
yes.
You know, you look at the track record of the last 3 Democratic administrations, and I'll give Biden a bit of a pass compared to Clinton and Obama. But Clinton and Obama were not designed to work on any of these structural issues. Arguably, Clinton's globalization plan gave us more of the problem rather than the solution. It was proposed roundly at the time by the left, but
Yeah.
corporate liked it. So there you go. So yeah, I think Kevin, I like the pigtails. And despite the pigtails and the mountain man beard, Kevin is saying something that's really important here. And I'm happy, I think it's fine to disagree with him, but I don't think it should just be dismissed as a wild ass comment from the
I
mountain man. It's
apologize.
a really important critique.
I apologize for coming across that way. I didn't mean
Let
that.
me just jump in one thing. I had a friend who worked for Kaiser, and her job, she was in a sense a project manager, but her job was she could be dysfunctional and stall a change management implementation. And whenever the folks on top said, oh, they're changing a thing that is working for us, they would send her over and it would stall. She would ask just these little questions, just these little things that look further here and ways to slow things that didn't feel like slowing things, while she said she would take on jobs that were essential at glue, and she didn't get there. She asked too many questions, and she worked for about 4 or 5 years until somebody up on top realized she was being hired for that. And so when they realized that she was but that's how they, when these things are not supposed to work, they don't work. I can cite you examples of how that happens. I know somebody whose job was to make that happen. And so, you were dismissive, and it's actually a fact that you can design things to make things not happen. And I think the same stuff that Kaiser used with her has been used at these things.
Kevin, you just reminded me of the William Macy movie, The Cooler, where he gets sent in. So Macy is this really bad luck guy who gets sent in when people have like a really hot hand. He goes and like sits next to them and starts to gamble, and their luck always breaks. But yeah, and there's intentional slowdowns that happen all the time.
Mhm.
Gil, back to you.
Progressives wouldn't last, and so if you implement it badly, it'll go away. They knew you should not count on progressive white folks or liberals or whatever they call themselves. Don't count on them; they won't last. So do it badly. They'll do things like Klaus said. Were they really qualified? Well, no, they didn't hire qualified people because they didn't want it to work.
Go ahead, Gil.
One of the things that not the we on this call, but our side is going to do over the next couple of years is do what Kevin's friend did, which is grind things to a halt, do whatever they can in the courts to slow down the implementation of the Project 2025 stuff. That's Band-Aid or tourniquet. That has to happen, but that's not where the focus for folks like us is. And I'd like to return the question to that of what's the opportunity here in this moment. I'm going to go off camera for a while, but I'm still listening.
Thanks, Gil. Doug.
Yeah. So I just want to share a story from my brother-in-law who has spent his lifetime in law enforcement. And he shared with me the Reader's Digest punchline, why did national law enforcement deteriorate to the level that it did, that gave rise to all of the, abuse of authority and violent, use of violence and killing, people. And there was a point, a few decades back where I think it was a administration came in and there was drug and crime through the roof, and there was a federally funded infusion of 200,000 new law enforcement officers to be hired across the country, and principles of diversity were involved, attached to that money. So you have law and order funding plus diversity. And the problem was they couldn't find enough people that were applying that could pass the exams from minority applicants. And the solution was to lower the pass level of the exam to enable the diversity target numbers of the percentage of these new 200,000 law enforcement officers to be people of minority origin, be it Black, Hispanic, whatever. And that lowering of the standards wasn't to say all Black officers who tested and became police officers were below standard, but the dropping of the pass level lowered the acceptance standard across the hirings. So you had a lot of people that the original pass rate would have not admitted as candidates to enforce the law and carry a weapon. And the whole kit and caboodle as a consequence was degraded. Fast forward a decade, 2 decades, and those people who came in back in those days have floated up through the promotion cycles into leadership positions, management. So the moral of the story, and the only reason I'm sharing this is because, forgive us for we know not what we do. The fundamental, and this isn't Republican and Democrat, and this isn't white and colonialist. It is just, what has been the orientation of us as a people, which is a projection of authority and power top down, and a complete inability to expand orientation to try to get closer to full appreciation and awareness of consequences at large in whatever context. And every time there has been action, we generate these consequences and go, oh, wow, look at that. Like, how did that happen? Where did that come from? And on a really primitive black and white basic level, all that's going on with this current administration coming in is a fundamental slash and burn reaction to the fact of all of the construction and imposition and regulation and burden and load, and wanting to just sort of scorch earth and do away with all of it. It's not a reason thing. It's not a logical thing. It's not a rationalized thing. And it's as primitive as we get as people from the standpoint of they're just acting. It's raw, naked power and exercise and projection of it. And they don't care what the system says. They don't care what the Constitution says. They don't care what is good or bad or moral or ethical. They don't care about any of that stuff. It's just like, I'm going to do what I want to do. And they don't care about the consequences. Now, it's a system test. And so far, the system is losing. Like, Supreme Court undercut, courts neutralized, legislative branch, half of it, decides to relinquish power, and it no longer has meaning or effect. It's in the face of just action and exercise of power. And it's not more complicated than that. And I don't think coming at that or responding or relating to it in any traditional paradigmatic way is going to generate any kind of different result or effect. The orientation of how we relate to each other, how we relate to what's needed, has to be the origin point for how we respond and take action. But if the orientation of action is rooted in the same old, frankly, the left doesn't have a prayer, because 90% of their platform and plank and center is abstract.
That was great. That was just great. Thank you.
And I'm complete. And thank you, Kevin.
Thank you for your help yesterday.
Thanks, guys. Rick, you're muted.
As an equity muse, I'd like to give a complete counterpoint to some of the sentiments that have been expressed, particularly by Kevin and you, Jerry. I think it's really toxic when we get on the bandwagon of being anti-progressive, anti-liberal. It's such a fun thing to do, to bash, but it has the unintended consequences of further atomizing any opportunity of developing social capital. David shared the documentary, Join or Die, and there is it's a social capital desert. And the alt-right are doing exactly what they want you to do, which is to bash liberals and progressives. And it's so counterproductive. The reason why I said I don't identify myself as a progressive liberal is because I don't want to have an individual political identity that's fixed. What I would prefer to identify with is the middle majority of people who can come together across the moderate spectrum of conservative and liberals so that we can marginalize the alt-right in particular, but the alt-left is so ineffective. I mean, I agree it's ineffective, but just getting on this bandwagon is completely and utterly counterproductive. And we have to come together and not be divisive, as Kevin was alluding to.
Can I respond to that?
Please, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm not trashing progressives and liberals. I'm just saying they're completely unreliable. They won't consistently show up, and you shouldn't rely on them. I can get them on board with food security first, climate resilience second, and reparations is a nice to have. I'm just saying, in my 25 years of work, reaching out and relying on progressives to care about economic justice and the racial wealth gap does not work. Yeah, I've gotten small things. I'm getting many more things if I lead with food security, mobile climate resilience that moves to where you're sheltering, and then, starting in the neighborhoods, but not restricting it there. So, I'm not trashing them. I'm just saying in my experience, they're completely unreliable.
Well, let me just counter that. And this is one of the reasons why I don't like this facilitated format, is because it doesn't allow dialogue. Is that because they're ineffective, or is it because you were ineffective in engaging them to be able to do the work?
I am finding that they will take action on food security. They will say economic justice, nice. When I say food security and climate resilience, they say, let me get involved.
Yeah, but I'm saying you're a one-man story, and we need lots of stories about.
Well, I've got a network of urban gardens that I'm working with. I mean, I am not sure I'm going to be in this call longer if I keep being jumped back on like this. I just have to say.
That's okay. If you don't want to talk, I won't talk either.
No, I keep being mischaracterized, and I'm not enjoying it.
Sorry, Kevin. I think what Rick was saying was you're one data point, and Rick is looking for more data points. I'm not sure that's so, but let's cool this down a little bit.
This
Because
is the reason
the opening invitation at the call was to look at the opportunities in this, and Kevin is presenting opportunities. And even if he's the only one doing this, there's an opportunity there that can be learned from and replicated perhaps in other realms and other places. It's a model and a strategy.
Well,
And it's not just like, oh, you're one guy. Things start in one place. And then if they are valuable, they hopefully propagate.
Yeah,
and Klaus, who nicely has his hand up, has a lot of stories in this
the
realm.
idea that Kevin is the only prescription.
Of course not. Of course I'm not. But I think we have a partially open global mind.
Yeah, actually. And so we keep stating the obvious. I mean, Doug, I appreciate what you're saying, but we keep bashing the obvious. I mean, what's the point, right? We all know what you're saying. And when we are criticizing the liberals, they keep stating the obvious and then don't do anything with it, right? So the point is, and the theme of the conversation is, what could we be doing? I mean, I'll give you one example. For example, in the educational area, there was this little rough up about the H-1B visas, right? So I remember at Disney, we fired the entire credit card department, some, I don't know, 600 people who were called into a meeting room. And they thought they would get a bonus because they were doing pretty good, but they were informed that they all got their walking papers, 30 days severance, but a select few were allowed to stay on for 3 months to train the incoming H-1B visa holders from India, right? So that's just disgusting, right? I mean, I was just like, are you kidding me? Some jackass in finance figured out, maybe we can save another 0.1 or 0.5% profit here. And so they're constantly spinning these ideas because the pressure to increase profit is just relentless. So Steve Bannon was the first one to come out and say, this is bullshit. Right. I mean, what you guys should be doing is train our own workforce. And Gil already made this comment. They should have, instead of DEI, they should have opened up the schooling and training and education to qualify a diversified workforce and take people out of poverty into an educational track that gives them opportunity. Right. So, but when and the discussion was opening up a wonderful opportunity. I wrote a paper about it. I got a lot of response on LinkedIn. When I pointed out this is not an issue of needing visas for an American workforce that has been declared incompetent, and useless, but it is a call to action. And if we understanding and seeing these things, engage. I mean, I found myself in the weird position of agreeing with Steve Bannon, right? And I complimented him and, go for it, dude. I mean, this is a great topic. You should bash, right? So there are things where we can actually actively engage, and provide intellectual support. I mean, they provide insights, and the understanding that we have. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense to just keep stating the obvious and feeling good about how much we know about, how bad these things are. No, where do you carry them? Where is the opportunity to engage, and make a difference? Sorry.
Don't be sorry, Klaus. That's great. Thank you. Rick.
I want to sort of lower the emotional reactivity that I was expressing earlier, particularly towards Kevin, in that in our communications, there is the intent and the interpretation. And I think what we just had was a perfect example of that. I interpret it with a certain lens, and you then countered it to alter my lens of what I was saying about bashing liberals and conservatives. I mean, liberals and progressives. And so, when that happens, if one can bring attention to it, process it, and understand it better, then we might be able to come together more effectively. So I don't want you to leave, because you always have something lively to contribute to the conversation. But it's how we handle our disagreements, and when we notice our emotional reactivity going up, and we say, "I'm going to leave," or "I'm not going to talk." So,
Well, maybe you shouldn't have framed it the way you did, Rick.
well, that's okay. Well, how would you suggest I frame it so it'd be accepted?
I was not, as I said, I was not bashing them. I think of them as an unreliable resource. You
Yeah.
called it bashing again and again and again. You were wrong again and again and again. And I said, you're wrong. That's not what I'm doing. Your framing is inaccurate. And, I think if you had listened, you wouldn't have heard what you heard.
Well, all I can say is you have to take into consideration both verbal and nonverbal, and the nonverbal is the one that conveys more. I interpreted it as bashing the sentiment. Now, having said that, you have to ask other people. It could just be between our dysfunctional communication between the two of us.
I totally agree with Kevin. They're a bunch of cats. I'm on the national team with the Sierra Club, with Citizen Climate Lobby. I mean, these guys are running into all directions. And to get them to agree on anything is just like a major task. And I'm really working on it. So no, I mean, Kevin was just making an observation, and Rick, you're taking it way too far down the line I mean, hurt feelings and all that stuff. Let's just.
That's your interpret. It wasn't hurt feelings. It wasn't that. It was about the communication. Now, there's another data point supporting Kevin. That's fine. Let's have a diversity of it. Maybe maybe I'm the odd one out. Even if I am the odd one out, how does that?
Talking way too much about this. We're carrying this way too far. Yeah, right.
Well, let me flip it the other way. How can we come together and deal with?
Could I intervene for a second?
Please, Gal.
Kevin has a perspective and Rick has a perspective, and they are different perspectives, and there's no way they're going to debate each other into an agreement here. Let's just acknowledge they have different perspectives and move on.
No, I have a different idea.
Agree with that, because if we
hang on.
Hold on, one at a time. Rick,
yeah.
you've had the air a lot. Let's let a couple people help us solve this problem. Go ahead, Slo.
Just as another data point, I don't remember how much of it was from Kevin. Some of it was probably from other people, but I was hearing something like the left and or not the left, but the progressives and the liberals. So I was nodding at first when Rick spoke, and then when Kevin spoke again about them being unreliable, that clarified it for me, Kevin. Then I got it more clearly the second time around, that you weren't bashing, you were just stating your experience that at least some other people have similarly had, that when they reach out, there's people among liberals and progressives who may resonate, but it's hard to get the whole thing going somewhere. And then Kevin was offering exactly how he did manage to engage them successfully. Like, that's what's exciting about his project. So I think my impression, and I don't remember specific people, my impression is there were other people who said things that fit into that, progressive liberal bashing mode. And I was glad that Rick said that at first. And then it turned into this thing. It became clear that Rick had heard Kevin as being more bashy than Kevin really is. To me, that seems like the main point of confusion. My guess is that if Rick and Kevin took the time and Rick understood Kevin's thinking toward liberals and progressives clearly, my guess is that Rick would actually resonate with that. I could be wrong, but maybe a practice that might help sometimes is when things get hot and heavy is to ask for reflections. Just, could you try to tell me just what you heard me say? And that slows us way down, and it's very frustrating, but it might help avoid or clear up some of these misunderstandings when they happen, and identify whether or not there is a real difference.
Yeah, I think that practice is not slow or frustrating. It's just sort of a thing we should practice more often. We have had no pauses in this conversation. We've been going hot and heavy. I think we spent enough time on that particular issue, and I was hoping that Doug had a sort of happy ending for us on this, perhaps.
Yeah, actually, yeah. We're all in the same boat. Like, bottom line, we're all in the same boat. We're in it together. And you can expand that to include as much scale and scope and as much diversity of different groups and populations and points of view and all of the rest.
Good morning.
Bottom line, we're all human beings. So if somebody else's contribution triggers me, for me, my first inquiry is, what's the button I was carrying that just got pushed? And that's on me. That's not on the person who said something that pushed it. First, always. Because if I'm reactive, I own the reaction. And whatever the underlying belief or fear or attachment or shadow or whatever, that statement by that other person reanimated. And pretty much with 100% certainty, I can count on the fact that whatever it was, that person was not saying it to push my button. Like, that was not their intention. Their intention was to share or communicate whatever it was they wanted to share or communicate.
Dave was apparently trying to push your button, but that's okay.
Right. And so, are there people that out of pattern behavior and habit push other people's buttons regularly? And do they look like that's the business they're in? Yeah. But from the inside out, is that actually their intention? I would hazard to say usually not. It's more about they just want to be right. From their inside out, they just want to be affirmed that they're right. And I had an old teacher who had a saying, which was, you can either be right or you can be close.
You can either be right or you can be
close.
Close.
In connection with other. You can't be both. And with that, I'll stop and I'm complete.
Thank you. Pause, please.
Yeah, I mean, just an observation, and I think I mean, that's what I tried to express. I said we are spending an inordinate amount of time on evaluating a scenario that we all know already, right? I mean, we keep saying things that we understand. What we don't talk so much about is where could we constructively engage, and help make a difference. And I think that is the theme of the conversation today, was set as, where do we go with this, right? But we spent 90% of the time explaining where we are starting from. And I think we all know where we're starting from. So why keep talking about it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard not to go back, Klaus, but you're right. It's hard not to go back because we're all trying to figure out what went wrong or what's working or whatever, and you have to look back a bit to detect that, to figure that out. And partly, and I didn't want to overcomplicate the previous back and forth, but I was kind of dissing liberals and progressives because I've had a friend that I made through the pandemic who's considerably more conservative than me, and boy, is he on about performative progressives, and everything comes down to these people, these elites, and everything else were just completely wet and wrong. But I wind up looking at the left going, wow, cancel culture is a terrible and stupid thing. Any healthy community brings people back in. So there's a couple interesting essays about the difference between call out culture and call in culture. And I think that we don't look at those things, and instead we do the programmatic thing and we try to train people to recognize something and do better instead of actually getting to the beliefs and behaviors that are kind of under all of this. And that's what I've been trying to dig for in some way in this call. And I feel like I opened up a couple windows on the topic, but I feel like there's a lot more to maybe do here. And I don't know, we may also be all tired of this topic because we're at near the end of this call time. And I'm interested in what you all think about the topic. And we don't have to come back to DEI or inclusion or progressives. We could pick a different kind of issue, something more positive to look for. What is the positive thing we might do? Thoughts before we ask Ken if he has a poem for us? Just reflections on this process. Frustrations are fine, but interesting paths forward, extremely welcome.
I mean,
Gil.
I'm kind of curious about the topic of the elites and merit, and how much can systems work if everybody gets to play, or do we have to always allocate them to the smart people? I don't know, some version of a conversation like that. How important is it to have Elon Musk's in the world? Do we rely on them? How heavily do we rely on them? I guess I don't know, something like that. I'm very confused about how important it is to have lots of smart people running everything.
Thanks for stating it that way, Dave. Gil.
Your invitation for this call was let's explore the opportunity in the crisis rather than the danger. I don't think we've done that very well. And for me, this call, particularly the last, I don't know, 30 or 40 minutes of this call has been an example of why we can't have good things.
Why we can't have what?
Why we can't have good things.
It's sort of a trope. It's a meme.
You know, the HAZZ thing. I'm just tongue in cheek on that. This is not the kind of conversation that explores the opportunity in the crisis rather than the danger for me. The last, third of it has not been that. The whole Rick, Kevin kerfuffle, and the, processing of processing, not interested.
Other thoughts? It's slow.
For me, everything that has happened is material to try and make soil out of. So trying to force everybody in this group to process it together is probably a bad idea. If anybody would like to spend some time, outside the whole group at some point, talking about a process or whatever that might, prevent and or notice and respond more fruitfully when things like that happen, I'd be happy to be part of that, because my guess is we could come up with some very light, just one or two things to do differently that might that we might learn from. It'll be an experiment. I think this is the important thing, is to my guess is we all understand this in some sense as an experiment, but I think it also falls into certain ruts and just we get tired of it. But the process of learning how to have good conversations across differences is I have more I have the most hope when I'm in groups who realize that's going to be an ongoing thing. They're not going to find some final thing and be done. It may come in waves, but we're going to be learning about this stuff the rest of our lives, if we're lucky.
Nicely put, John. Thank you. I'm pasting in. Oops, I should put it actually next to Slow's Loretta Ross profile.
I also wanted to just notice that the gender, of the calls may play into this, and that all of the two women that I could, guessing see have left the call a while ago.
Indeed, and that's a perennial issue for us. Ken, do you want to explain the best and the brightest thing you just posted?
Yeah, there's a comment about, do we need do we have smart people in charge of things? So, JFK hired the best and the brightest. He got all these Harvard guys and, they made absolutely disastrous decisions because they had no common sense. And I personally have encountered so many people in academia they have a whole alphabet after their name and they completely lack common sense. And just because you have an advanced degree does not mean you know how to operate in the world with an integrative intelligence that actually looks at how to make things better. So I just throw it in there as, that's just one example, and I'm sure we can all think of times when we've been around really smart people who are like, "Are you serious? You think that's a good idea?" So I'm very wary of really smart people being in charge, especially if there's no women. MIT Center for Collective Intelligence says one of the conditions to create collective intelligence is to add women to the team all the way up to all women. And if there are no grandmothers in there, if it's not transgenerational, if there's not people who've had experience of being marginalized, if there's not people who have been out there really getting pounded and are at the wrong end of the power systems, I want those people to have a voice in being in charge, because I think that's where we're going to start to get more systemic intelligence. So those are the kind of smart people I look for leadership.
Thanks, Ken. I don't know if this sounds like a topic title, but I'm interested in what does common sense co-regulation look like? And by co-regulation, I'm using that language instead of governance, which is language we were using a while ago in 2024 when we had several separate calls, sort of a small run of calls, trying to explore what kinds of governance mechanisms work. But we're in the middle of this conversation because our larger society has been producing a whole bunch of social experiments that have not gone well. And the people who were struck badly by those social experiments have decided, screw this, I don't want this kind of world anymore. I'm not a lab rat or whatever. And that's a piece of the reason why we're in the current political situation that we're in. So I'm really interested in that. I think this is a positive course of inquiry in what actually works, where humans can get together and say, well, we have this problem. Let's try this, let's try that. Here's my belief system behind it, whatever it might be. And I agree. I'm going to bash highly degreed people. I know a few too many people who have models in their heads that are sort of dominate over whatever common sense or whatever other things might play in when they think. And so I'm very leery when somebody says, "Oh, here." If you look at the Foursquare model out of integral naked Ken Wilbury sort of stuff, there's a whole bunch of people who live by that and think that that's the model to explain all models and all everything. And I'm like, it's a good model. It's a useful model. Some models are practical, but many models are broken. Anyway, anyone with a closing thought for this call, or shall I just go to Ken? Yes. Ken, please.
This is a prose poem by a fellow by the name of Lewis Jenkins. It's called Earl. In Sitka, because they are fond of them, people have named the seals. Every seal is named Earl because they are killed one after another by the orca, the killer whale, Sea bodies tossed left and right into the air. At least he didn't get Earl, someone says. And sure enough, after time, that same friendly, bewhiskered face bobs to the surface. It's Earl again. Well, how else are you to live except by denial, by some palpable fiction, some little song to sing while the inevitable, the black and white blindsiding fact comes hurtling towards you out of the deep.
Seems very appropriate for today's conversation.
Thanks, Earl.
Thanks, Earl. At least they didn't get Earl. Appreciate that. And I appreciate you all. I think that the last call was a little janky. This call was a little janky, but it's in the janks that I think we learn how to do some of the things we need to do.
I'd like to offer an observation. I came in a half hour late, but I didn't really hear a lot of opportunity being explored. I heard a lot of rehashing of problems. And, you know, my wife's a nutritionist, and even if you have terminal cancer, there are things you can do through nutrition to alleviate your suffering. So, you know, even if we're at a terminal stage of our civilization and things are going to be breaking down and falling apart and there's going to be a lot of suffering, there are things we can do to ameliorate that suffering. And I would really love to be in conversation with people who are focused on that rather than, oh my God, look at this, you know, and the analysis of what's gone on. There's limited utility in that. I think it's important not to deny it, but it's far more important to say, what would a healthy functioning system be like here? What would something that could actually rise up and create an immune response in the social body, in the political body? I'd really like to be in that conversation, and I hope that one day we can have that.
I would love help in creating that with us here. So anyone who wants to suggest means and so forth, you're very welcome.
You know,
So
one
let's see
thing
where we
would be
go.
a focus on, you know, and this is, I think Kevin's gone now, but oh no, Kevin, I still see you there.
Kevin's still there.
Kevin is actually probably the best example in this group and in my life that I know of.
Yes, I'm here.
We're in shit here and we have to figure our way out of this, you know, so let's roll up our sleeves and pitch in and dig people out of the mud and the dirt and figure out how we're going to feed each other. And, you know, that's an immune response. It's like, okay, we're in crisis, you know, we have to reorganize and we have to
Yeah.
reorganize at the local level. So, you know, to me, that is a really stellar example of a healthy immune response to a disaster. And how can we use that as kind of a template for how can we organize ourselves effectively in our lives to,
Yeah.
you know, so thank
Well,
you,
you know,
Kevin.
You know,
this group,
Kevin's been and his community have been living through a real disaster.
Yeah.
Kevin's
We're all
trying to,
living.
Trying to talk.
he's trying to talk right now, Gil.
Sorry.
Yeah, you
well,
interrupted
I'm
him.
just saying,
Go ahead,
you know,
Kevin.
in this group, there is a repeated, fairly frequent pattern of Jerry being dismissive of what I say that I'm starting to react to. You know, what happened today happens quite frequently. So that sets me a little bit on edge because what you detected, Gail, is what I run into a lot from Jerry's leadership when I'm talking.
And Kevin, I'm carrying a button that you didn't put there, that when you say white people are unreliable blankly, white liberals are unreliable.
That's not, oh God, I don't want to go back into, that's not
sorry.
what I said. That's not what I said. People who call themselves progressive, who are not, they showed up at George Floyd, they stopped within about 18 months, and they're unreliable. You know, in my experience, you cannot rely on the folks who talk because they won't do it. I've found another way in where I don't lead with economic justice.
Kevin, could I interrupt?
You're regularly being dismissive, Jerry.
Kevin, could I interrupt, please?
Sure.
I share your interpretation of this story, but I don't think it was wise to bring it up at this moment. We had talked about that 15, 20 minutes ago. We were wrapping up the call and you sort of opened up that can of worms at a point where it wasn't really necessary to do that. So I wish you hadn't.
So,
Jerry,
so I wish you hadn't done that. Let me just say something else if I can remember what the fuck it was. Oh yeah. It actually goes to the reliability, the count on ability of white liberals. Kevin and the stuff that he's describing in his community in Western North Carolina is a community facing real disaster. So people get to cut the crap and roll up their sleeves and dig each other out of the mud. We are all living in imaginary disaster, hypothetical disaster, disaster somewhere else, disaster for other people. It hasn't hit us yet the way it has hit some other people. It might be that when it does, we behave differently. But in the absence of that, we get to be really abstract and imaginary and hypothetical and theoretical. And it's a really different kind of conversation. And Rick, to your point about disagreements get worked out really differently when people's lives are on the line than when they're sitting around in Zoom space. And you can tell which way I'm interested.
And Kevin, respectfully, I was trying to say that I agree with your observation. When you say it the way you said it,
I gotta go, folks.
It hits something in me. But if you heard what I said also about performative progressives and all that, and cancel culture and all that, I am on your side of this issue. I get it, and I'm really pissed about it. And it would be lovely to figure out if we could harness our collective energies to figure out what to do about it, because we seem to fall into the demographic that is being dismissed here.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're dismissive of my stuff about things other than this issue. It's a pattern that I hear from your moderation, and I'm getting tired of it.
I apologize, Kevin. And thanks for coming back, and we'll see how this goes. And with that, I think we conclude this episode of As the World Turns, brought to you by Palmolive, which I grew up in South America knowing as Palmolive. And Colgate was Colgate. Anyway, and we didn't have Crest. There was no Crest down there. I don't know why. Lima, they didn't get to.
My childhood was brought to you by Whammo.
Whammo, by Whammo, nice. And Pine Sol was Pinesol. All right, everybody. See you in a week. Thank you.